friends, welcome back to another episode of the CDP Growth Show. I'm joined by Andy today, who is the Director of Growth at ContentCal. Andy, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Joseph. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, So, Andy, before we kind of, dive into kind of the main part of the episode, just give the audience context for kind of, first of all, what ContentCal is, and then really, who the platform serves.
Yeah, so ContentCal is, given the name, funny enough, a content marketing platform to help businesses organize and plan their content marketing efforts. Yeah. I'm one of the founding team. We launched the product in 2017, so just over 3 years ago. It's now used by 37,000 businesses in 140 countries.
Wow, that's awesome. Wow, okay. And how did you kind of get into, it's something that I always really like asking my guests is, have you always been a B2B SaaS? Have you, transitioned out of B2C? How did you kind of get into this crazy world of B2B SaaS marketing?
Always been in B2B SaaS and always been a salesperson. So before doing this, I have a sales background, which gives you a kind of good basis for understanding marketing as well. Mm-hmm. So really just marketing in the field. All along, past through my sales career, I thought I could probably have a crack at maybe doing a company myself one day. Whilst I wasn't brave enough to launch it by myself, I found someone with an idea, a guy called Alex Packham, who is our brilliant CEO. Joined him. He had an idea. I thought it looked good. So we built up the MVP and took it to market, and
awesome. So you've really been there since like pretty much day one then in terms
of
growth. Wow, okay, awesome. And how long ago was that now?
So that was beginning of 2017 when we launched, and it was like 2016 when the initial concept was put together, MVP, that kind of stuff. So my role as director of growth in the early days has been you try and find anyone that will listen to you, right? Speak to anyone. So very salesy. But as it's evolved into creating our marketing engine, building our tech stack, as we'll go on to.
And obviously, given the platform, content marketing, I think a really good piece to touch on, because a lot of our audience, particularly, early stage founders, people who are in that early to kind of mid stage of their company. I think I'm sure you see this as well. A lot of companies, I use the term churning out content for the sake of churning out content. And I think a lot of companies, when they approach content marketing, it's a bit of a sporadic kind of, blog post here, article here. There's no real structure to it, and it's, like I said, it's a bit messy. So if you've got kind of any tips or advice around how companies should really be approaching their kind of B2B, content marketing strategy?
Fantastic question. So it's always a difficult one when it comes to B2B because naturally, content can be quite dull in that space. There's a huge amount of creativity that needs to go into it, and to save a whole big strategy conversation, I think some kind of quick tips I would give is like, make sure social media or content in general is not the preserve of one individual in the business. Make sure it's a collective effort, getting everyone involved as much as possible. People from the field, from marketing, from product, from customer service, all of those individuals have a fantastic narrative to share. So that's from a content generation, that's the thing I would do. But then I see a lot of content going out, as to your point as well, that has not been thought about from an SEO perspective. There's that. And I always remind people to think about the kind of holy trinity of content, which is think about your paid content, which obviously where that goes, your owned content, the things that you create, the big pieces you want to be known for, and then your earned content. So which is making sure that you, PR, making sure you're on other people's websites too. So strong backlinking strategy from that perspective.
Makes sense. And I think we're, especially, platforms like LinkedIn now, I think we're really seeing a big rise, I'm sure you've seen this as well, of personalities, people with podcasts and individual, CEOs themselves trying to brand themselves in their industry, SDRs. Do you really see that becoming almost like, I don't want to say the new content strategy, but I do see a big rise in more of the personalities rather than the company itself creating the content, if that makes sense. Are you seeing that as well, or?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a person that is a fantastic exemplar of this, outside of your typical Gary V's, all right? So big personal brand, but something that's more realistic to a typical individual to relate to would be the ex-CMO of a company called Drift, called Dave Gerhardt. So now of Privy, but he's a fantastic example where he was the CMO, not the CEO, but he was the face of the brand. It's a very similar situation to the setup that we have with Alex and myself. I'm more of the face of the brand because I come from a background, content marketing is my thing. So I talk about it all the time. So we create a personal brand, and people are more likely to engage with an individual around the topic of content marketing than necessarily consume a blog post that we're creating on it.
I think it's one of them things. I think you should be doing both, but I do think, like with platforms like LinkedIn, I think if you can create that kind of personality or multiple personalities within the company, I think it can have a really, really, really strong effect.
Exactly. Back to that previous point, getting more of the company involved in social and content is a really powerful thing. But there's, like with anything important or complex, there's no single trick or top hack, but
strategy. It makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And kind of, moving more onto the kind of, tech stack, kind of heavy questions, I think the reason why it's obviously we get a lot of early stage founders, listening to the show, and I'm sure you've seen this probably, with ContentCal, and you'll have seen it with lots of other startups, is you can very quickly, as a new company spend, buy 15 different marketing softwares, when actually if you just use free, you would have achieved the exact same result, right? So it's how do you build a lean tech stack that doesn't require you to spend thousands as a new startup. So I think what would be really, really interesting to hear for the audience is really how, because I know you've been with ContentCal from like since day one, so I think it'd be really, really interesting to see how you've kind of structured that and kind of grown with that tech stack.
So we've been fortunate that from right the early days we've got a decent lead flow, and we'll talk to how we got that if we need to, but so very quickly we grew out of some products. So naturally managing a CRM on a spreadsheet like most people start, so that died very quickly. Then rolled out Salesforce, then very quickly realized reversing out of that because that's far too complex, too big, requires its own administrator to get it. So found out spending loads of time just administering simple stuff. So that went. We implemented Intercom pretty much from day one as well. So, but it doesn't do CRM very well as much as they kind of touch on it. It just doesn't work. So it's not the one. It's fantastic for live chat. We couldn't have scaled customer service without it, but we battled where it fits in our stack. So very much have just kept it in its customer service silo. Then basically we wanted to bring in HubSpot was the thing, because we're a huge advocate of an inbound strategy anyway, because we had great lead flow, and because of the amount of integrations you could do with that. So Intercom can talk to it, so conversations go into HubSpot, single view of the customer kind of thing, customer's activity, that kind of thing was all really, really valuable. And especially because we integrated HubSpot into our onboarding process within our application. When people sign up to ContentCal, they say, I'm going to use it, I'm a B2C, I'm going to use it with this many businesses, here's my budget. All of that stuff goes into HubSpot. So that to me, that was the winning thing for me. Felt flexible, and you can do everything at a pretty basic user perspective to make stuff work.
I think, again, something that would be interesting maybe, because I know a lot of people, Intercom is obviously, maybe a software that you use once you're really getting that traction. Something that I've heard actually quite a few founders ask is, when do we decide to put like a full-blown software? Like, should you have Intercom from day one, do you think? Or, a software like Intercom, is it important to have a live chat software in place? Or
for us personally, yes. Our product is used really heavily. We want it to be used day to day, and we want to be there the moment the customer has the first query. So and because with Intercom, I don't know what the commercials are now, but for I think they still have really good startup packages.
Yeah.
It was a while before we started paying. We pay a hell of a lot for it now, but but yeah, from the early days, you know, it scaled really nicely. So I would say day one.
Makes sense. And perhaps we can maybe kind of talk about also, you know, ContentCal and how maybe that could fit with, because I just think it's obviously quite fitting being a marketing software, how that fits into, you know, for example, a startup founder's kind of overall content marketing strategy. So if you could kind of walk through really how someone as a kind of early stage founder would really be using the software, you know, like yourself, and how it could kind of aid their growth in the, you know, early days.
Definitely. And I think because everything's happening at such ridiculously rapid pace in an early stage business.
Yeah.
So whether you're day one or, you know, 3 years in, like we are, it's happening at crazy pace. So you need some way that you're going to organize all of your content output. So because everyone's, like I said before, everyone has a voice, everyone has a narrative on the business from what they're experiencing. So being able to have a single place where people can share those ideas, which, you know, facilitates and fosters collaboration in one place, and we go, all right, that's some brilliant ideas actually we've got in our kind of pinboard, if you will, and then we can drag those ideas into our kind of calendar interface. So you do well in the ideation, great in like team collaboration. So you can plan out all of your social content, your blog, what's happening on YouTube, what's happening on email. So you get a really full picture of your whole content marketing landscape, and you can go, right, so here's what the next month, next quarter looks like. Total transparency, everything's organized and streamlined, because all of these channels are very easy to lose control of and then live in silos.
I'd be interested to kind of, sorry, were you going to say something then?
No, I was just going to say, does that make sense, that explanation?
And that makes perfect sense. And I think, again, something that I've just with my own content strategy, and I think with, again, a lot of people share this, it's how far in advance, you know, should you be planning content? Should it be something where you're saying, okay, for the next quarter, this is the entire content strategy, or should it be more of a kind of week on week, you know, month on month type thing? I feel like sometimes if you plan too far in advance, and then if you see this as well, the content can sometimes feel a bit forced. Whereas if you do it, you know, on a more kind of week by week or month by month basis, you know, it's more relevant, if that makes any sense. And if you see that as well. Yeah, no,
it makes sense. And for us at ContentCal, and what I would typically advocate, I guess we're in a slightly weird situation right now where we completely changed our content strategy, and we are planning less far in advance than we would do typically. But usually we would have the strategies in our kind of plan organized for the next quarter, really, because we typically know what's going to come down the pipe. Now we're 3 years in, that's different to someone brand new. But we know that we're relaunching analytics next month, so we'll need to do a campaign here. We know we've got these things going on, so that's kind of planned. But the actual implementation, to your point, we wouldn't typically do more than a week of the actual content.
Got it. Okay, makes sense.
Right. It's just the overarching strategies and themes are planned more in advance.
Makes sense.
Because that way you've got better oversight of what's happening down the pipe, so you can already start to think about the ideas around them.
Yeah, so it's really laying the structure and laying the foundation, and then, you know, like you said, week by week, you're then creating the kind of specific content itself.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Makes sense. And again, you know, I'm sure you would have faced challenges, you know, especially in the early days, and probably even still now, you know, when really trying to scale that tech stack. And I think something, again, for these early stage founders, you know, they're going to be coming into a lot of challenges when trying to build up that tech stack, and, you know, like I said, probably buying softwares that they just don't need to be using. So what advice would you give for founders, you know, to maybe avoid some of the challenges that you faced, and just maybe some of the challenges that you do see, you know, founders and kind of these early stage marketing teams, you know, kind of coming into?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think just drawing a spec out first is a really important thing, because there's a bit of guesswork that we had to do in the early stage. And you know, if you think about what the full picture looks like, if you're you know, I'm not too sure we would have gone down the route that we did if we weren't such an inbound heavy business. If we were building more around outbound, we might well have thought, you know, there's cheaper CRMs that are really good for sales, right? Pipedrive, for example, being one of them, right? But because we we want to be able to drive a huge amount of inbound efforts. We want to see which content's working, what's driving growth and engagement, because obviously we're a very content heavy business. It's our message, it's our shtick, isn't it? So you know, everything's very content driven. So so having that kind of platform like HubSpot makes perfect sense for us as a business. That being said, it does get, because we drive maybe 1,000, 2,000 leads per month typically, and you pay per contact on HubSpot. It is expensive. Like when you're driving like really big volumes. So it's worth, that's probably the only thing that I think I underestimated how costly it becomes as you go on. So both HubSpot and Intercom have really attractive things to get started.
But then as you scale it, the numbers go. That makes sense. I do think, like you said, it's really about assessing, you know, first of all, what your business is and kind of the strategies that you're really going to be employing. You know, is it going to be more outbound? Is it going to be more inbound? And then I think if you are on the kind of inbound side, it's probably going to require, you know, a few more softwares like HubSpot that you need to be implementing to really help you scale that up. So I think you've got to just assess it based on volume, or you know, whatever strategy you're using. That makes sense. And I think, you know, particularly over the last few years, I know you guys are still kind of, you know, rolling out at the minute, and it's Segment, but we're really seeing quite a big rise of these, you know, CDPs coming into play, and really being these like 40,000 foot overview that kind of links everything together, you know, in terms of the data of each platform. So you know, I think something that I'd be curious to know is really what made you roll Segment out, and you know, how did you kind of come to the point where you feel like you needed a software like Segment, you know, to be in place?
Yeah, so great question. There was a few gaps that started emerging with a tech stack, which I've pretty much only spoken about, Intercom and HubSpot, right? So so they serve their purposes, but what we didn't find they served as well as they could have done is more detailed understanding of how people are interacting with our product, because that's the next layer of growth, where we think we've got a really good acquisition funnel. I think there's opportunity to improve it, like always, but it's working quite well. But the next layer of growth is like, we've got loads of people coming into our funnel, but you know, how do we then improve conversion? So we're finding that we were hitting a challenge, because HubSpot's really good at collating the fact that someone signed up, this is what their budget is, whatever, we'll go approach them. Now, it's every chance that the salesperson doesn't convert that. We convert at about a rate of 10%, which I think is pretty high, actually. But still 90% of people don't buy. So that's an issue. So that's the big focus for us, because we want to understand that if someone comes into our product, did they press this button? Did they take this action? Did they complete this? And it's more of that kind of contextual driven stuff. So that's what we really, there's a number of benefits here, is that we want to be able to trigger the salespeople to reach out to someone who's just been trialing that. You know, it might be HSBC, for example, that's trialing, and they just created their first campaign. Maybe that is the opportunity to proactive reach out. As more, you know, we're not a very pushy sales business, and it's kind of, we take a lot of inspiration from Drift, actually, in the way that they do sales. So very contextual, that kind of stuff. So Segment, whilst we're hoping all these benefits to be realized, it's worthwhile saying is that, you know, these are the gaps we've seen. Where, you know, I'm not implementing it. Our tech director is doing this, because Segment is a beast, right? So there's a lot. So I think the upside of that is going to be absolutely huge for increasing conversion potential. It's also going to have massive upside for reducing churn as well, because if we start to see a reduction in activity levels on certain things, then
you can go in and
Like you talk to any SaaS individuals, certainly in B2B, you go, what's the thing that keeps you up at night? On that list will be churn somewhere, right? Which is just the worst word ever. And you know, you're constantly battling that. I think we have a very good churn rate, but it's still there. And you know, you lose any customer, it's heartbreaking. So you're like, so that's where we think Segment's going to have massive impact. And then And then finally, I don't know whether this is relevant to talk about now, but I'll mention it because it kind of fits into the whole data stack, is that we've also just literally implemented a tool called ChartMogul, which is
like a data analyst.
Yeah, exactly. So we had a number of different billing systems. We had stuff happening on HubSpot, and what we were finding is that where a salesperson would kind of, convert the deal, it's all coming inbound, convert the deal, done the demo, whatever, and put the revenue in, that revenue wasn't always lining up to accounting systems, which we use Xero for our accounting. So ChartMogul is a fantastic way in which linking all of that together, and we can really easily interrogate MRR, ARR,
and see exactly. Pinpoint.
Exactly. So that was so there were some gaps that we're currently filling.
Interesting. And I think, again, going back to the kind of, I know you said the word kind of contextual when referring to the CDP, and I think it is that kind of software where if you're not sure of, for example, HSBC, they're using the software, maybe they've just logged in, they're trying to create the first campaign, and it's a lot of the time it's them scenarios where they've maybe created a campaign, it's not working for some reason, or they're a feature's not working just the right way for them, and it's them points where if the salesperson has got that information, that's where you can really make them kind of pieces of kind of contact where you can contact them about XYZ and do you need help. And I think that's where a CDP, particularly for SaaS businesses, is really, really useful in that kind of free trial period.
Definitely. I mean, we're in a position where we can harvest so much relevant information that you take the guesswork out of sales. You don't need to do a weekly check-in to say, how are you getting on with your trial? Because right? Because you're like, oh, I see you haven't had an opportunity to create this. Was there anything that stopped you? And that's much, much, much more relevant, better for customers, and better for us.
Yeah, 100% agree. And to kind of, to wrap this up, it's always the toughest question. I know you kind of said before the podcast that you were trying to kind of push away the question, and it's, really kind of focusing more on the kind of marketing and kind of growth side. If there was one metric, I know it's a tough question, if there was one metric that, as a, director of growth, B2B SaaS marketer, that you really should be tracking to really kind of help you understand that customer better, what would be that kind of one golden metric? And I know that's kind of a tough question in itself because there's never just one metric, but
fortunately, after being very scared of this question, thinking how on earth am I going to answer succinctly, I've had a chance to have a think whilst we've been doing this, and I know the answer, and the answer is share of voice. So we benchmark ourselves against our competitors from an organic search perspective. We have a kind of saying here of own your growth, and we've spent a lot of money on paid ads, a lot. I mean, probably other people spend more, but it still makes my eyes water on PPC and Facebook ads, etc. And conversion doesn't scale in a linear way with the amount you spend. You hit limits at some point. And the only way to really sustain growth, and certainly as we've seen of late, when we hit crises like this, is to have a really solid organic strategy where you appear, when someone is looking for you, you are there. And you can only do that by monitoring your share of voice. Of which there are a number of tools to do that, to look at how. Got it, exactly. Brand24, look at SEM Rush. There's a number of tools you can do that, but we basically track what our share of voice is versus our competitors, and meaningful movements on that mean meaningful movements everywhere in the funnel.
That's really interesting you said that, because I think a lot of people perhaps jump to well, you should be tracking the free to paid, or you should be tracking, but I think like you said there of when you can really understand what your kind of within your industry, what your overall share of that kind of, like you said, voice is, I think it's the more you can increase that, the less you've got to use Facebook ads, and you've got to really heavily rely on these paid channels. So it's really, really interesting you said that. And I mean, has it been platforms like Brand24 that you've been able to kind of track them specific kind of where you're being mentioned? Have they been useful for you? Because I know a lot of companies do use Brand24.
So I like Brand24. There's a number of other tools that I use as well. So I look at that. That's quite heavily like social focused. So I'm looking at both that from a social media perspective, but also looking at like SEMrush, for example, and looking at like organic search volume of us versus competitors, for example, right? Yeah, so that's another thing that I'd use for that. But and it's I think it's the organic search stuff is the bit I think not just me, the whole business is really, really keen on. Yeah, exactly, because we want to. We're a fast growing business, just raised another funding round, so the expectation is 100% growth. So there's obviously a number of different things you can do to play tunes on that, conversion rates across a number of different metrics. But at the very top of the funnel, the very most, for me, that if you nail that critical metric and you have critical mass coming onto your site, then then it's pretty fun playing tunes on the rest of the stuff.
Of course, yeah. But like you said, it is the more you can, especially from day one, rather than, I think a lot of companies, they particularly startups where they've got a big round of investment when they're just starting out, they like to jump to these things like Facebook ads and these paid channels, whereas if they kind of took the back step a little bit and focused on the SEO, focused on the organic content, I think it pays such dividends in the future when you start ranking for these certain blogs. And I just think it's a much better overall strategy when you can focus on the organic side.
Yeah, exactly, because it's sustainable, which is the important thing. Where and I'm not saying don't run Facebook ads. I'm just saying don't become overly reliant on them, because we have fallen into that trap.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, look, Andy, it's been really, really awesome having you on the show. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.